Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. And first, I want to start out by begging the patience of my listeners, suffering still a little laryngitis and a bit of congestion, so we'll struggle along as we may, and I beg your indulgence. Now, I wish to continue our reading and discussion of the book, The Papacy and the Civil Power. We're nearing the end of the book, and by now, it should be well understood by my listeners the difference between a civil government established under the papal model and a government like ours, created under a Protestant model, whereas under the Roman Catholic model, the papal model, the church and the state are united, and the Pope ultimately not only rules over the church, but he rules over the state too. And the Protestant form of government, which divides church and state, renders unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and renders unto God and no one else that which is God's. And R.W. Thompson has minutely explored this subject, and it is well understood that the two systems are completely incompatible, to say the least. And this is the great caution that R.W. Thompson launches to his readers, that if the Roman Catholic model ever gains the ascendancy in this country, a complete and total change of the government will result, and tyranny will characterize that new government. So if you love liberty, if you love to serve Christ according to the Scriptures and the leading and teaching of the Holy Spirit and your conscience, then you must support and defend the current form of government, or rather the original form of government established in this country, a Protestant form of government. And if you love tyranny, and if you love to be dictated to by a man who calls himself the replacement of the Son of God on earth, then you will naturally defend a papal form of government. It is my hope that the power and strength achieved by the Roman Catholic Church and the Roman Catholic hierarchy post-Vatican Council II and the ecumenical movement will be reversed before total papal tyranny replaces our liberties. So far, it appears that tyranny has won, and that Protestants don't even decry this new form of government being coming down upon our heads. And it's an extremely dangerous turn of events that have taken place in this country as a result of Vatican Council II. And very few people are told the dangers, nor are they told from where all the changes are coming. It's coming from the Pope. It's coming from the Roman Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic hierarchy, who have free reign in our government. Congress, the White House, and the Supreme Court, the military, banking, education, and even in the churches. If we do not resist, the dark days of the Middle Ages will characterize the new world order. Now, picking up where we left off yesterday, after R.W. Thompson lays forth the very stark differences, the incompatible differences between the two types of government, a papal government and a Protestant government. He says, thus we see the radical and irreconcilable difference between these two opposing systems of government, the Protestant and the papal. And it is impossible to escape the conviction that the substitution of the former for the latter was not only accordant to the principles recognized by Christ and the apostles, but absolutely necessary to elevate and improve the condition of mankind. So long as but one form of religious faith was tolerated, and all else was regarded as treason against God, popes and princes kept mankind in degrading servitude by the infliction of the most terrible punishments. Charity, love, and the mild Christian virtues, so beautifully exemplified in the lives of Christ and the apostles, were dethroned by hatred and revenge. And now, when the established, fully developed, and tolerant Protestantism of the United States has carried us forward to the very front rank of the nations, we have those among us who impudently tell us that every step of our prosperity is marked by treason to God, and that they are the chosen and selected vicegerents of the Almighty to bring us back to the obligations of Christian duty. If we rebuke them ever so mildly for their insolence, and protest against their destroying the work of our fathers, and they call it persecution, because it denies them the liberty of striking down whatsoever the Pope shall demand to be destroyed. If we insist that they shall obey our Constitution in consideration of the protection they receive from it, they tell us that the Pope is to them a domestic prince who steps in between them and it, bids defiance to its injunctions, and sets aside its obligations whensoever he shall deem it necessary to the ends and aims of the papacy to do so. Even if there were no principle in the Constitution the Pope might desire to set aside, the assertion of the right and power to do so should command our most serious attention. But when he fixes his pontifical curse upon the very fundamentals of our government, and marshals his forces to assail them, it is as much our duty to resist him as it is to defend our lives. What is R.W. Thompson telling us? Simply this, that if we fail to resist the Pope and his hierarchy in this country, it will indeed cost us our lives. How does he make that assertion? By now it should be blindingly obvious to my listeners that over and over and over throughout all history, the last 2,000 years, any time the papacy gained the ascendancy, people died. It is the most glaring, most obvious point of history. Everywhere the papacy gained control, people died. That's as simply as you can put it. This book, from cover to cover, is full of examples, never-ending examples, of the destruction that the papacy levels upon those who won't submit to his divine right authority. And to suppose, to even entertain the notion that the papacy may have changed in this late day is absurdity. He continues, he says, we have sufficiently indicated in the previous chapters wherein he has done so, and there is no authority in the church, whether hierarchical or lay, entitled to gainsay what he has declared. There is no single man in the United States, no matter how high his position in the church, who has authority to define the principles or declare the purposes of the papacy. He may avow what may seem best to him under any given state of circumstances, but in doing so he speaks for himself alone. Whenever he speaks for the church, his individual opinions are of no value, since by the dogma of the Pope's infallibility, he is required to surrender his will and conscience into the keeping of the Pope. The Pope is the sole exponent and interpreter of the law of the Church, which he may abrogate or change at his pleasure. And however much he may tolerate for a time and for prudential motives the expression of individual opinions contrary to those set forth in the encyclical and syllabus of 1864 and other pontifical briefs, from these alone can we derive a just and accurate understanding of the faith and doctrines of the Roman Church. Let us take a single illustration out of the many which are exhibited almost every day. A late number of the Catholic world contains an eloquent article on, quote, religion and state in our republic, unquote. That's the title of it, evidently from the pen of a learned and distinguished editor. Referring to the time when, by possibility, the Roman Catholic population of the United States may, quote, become an overwhelming majority, unquote, and I will simply add, as in today, and endeavoring to remove any cause of alarm among Protestants on that account, he says, quote, they will never seek to tyrannize over their fellow citizens, to establish their religion by force, or to compel anyone to do those things which are required only by the Roman Catholic conscience, unquote. Such assertions as these are not worth the value of a rushlight in showing what the Pope would require to be done in the United States if he had an obedient majority to control the government. Whatever the author of them may think of himself, and however hearty the response they may meet in the minds of intelligent laymen, they utterly fail of any other effect than to delude those laymen and such Protestants as accept them. Measured by the papal standard, they are heretical. By the constitutions of popes, the decrees of councils, the repeated action of Roman Catholic governments, and by the avowals of the present Pope, the lay of the Roman Church is held to enjoin upon its authorities the duty to extirpate heresy, to destroy every other form of religion than the Roman Catholic, to compel obedience to it in faith and in morals, and to do all this by force, by uniting the Church and the state together and requiring the state, as in the case of France under her obedient kings, to pass such statutes as shall bring these results about. And it can only mislead the incautious and unwary to pretend that different results would be sought, after in this country if the policy of the government were directed by the Pope. The form of government which the papacy dictated when it had the power to enforce obedience, and none other, would, if it had that power in the United States, spring up upon the ruins of our Protestant institutions. What was a Christian government in France, acceptable to the popes, would furnish the model for the construction of the new government here. And this writer, perhaps unwittingly, concedes as much in the very next sentence when he says that, quote, the difficulty lies chiefly in respect to those laws which forbid certain things as contrary to the divine law, unquote. Certainly the difficulties lie just there, because out of it grows the whole controversy about the spiritual and the temporal powers. At that point exists the radical disagreement between the Protestant and the papal systems of government, between the United States government and that of France when it was a Christian state after the papal model. This difference has been pointed out sufficiently to show wherein the principles of our government are, quote, contrary to the divine law, unquote, as the Pope interprets it, and he must be exceedingly ignorant who does not see that if these were destroyed, the government would fall. All the talk about the necessity of giving to the law an ethical standard is a mere pretext for keeping governments as well as individuals within the circle of moral duty which the Pope may choose from time to time to mark out. When he shall prescribe that duty in anything, whether it concerns civil policy or the intercourse of individuals with each other, whatsoever is done to the contrary by the government or the individual becomes heretical and therefore sinful. In such a case, to which command, that of the government or the Pope, does the doctrine of the Pope's infallibility require the Papists to render obedience? This writer in the Catholic world answers just as all other ultramontanes do, setting aside with entire frankness all the mere quote-unquote private versions or modifications of Catholicity as counting for nothing, and going directly to the Pope as the fountainhead of all authority in the Roman Church. He says this, quote, "For ourselves, we are purely and simply Catholic, and profess an unreserved allegiance to the Church which takes precedence of and gives the rule to our allegiance to the state. If allegiance to the Church demanded of us opposition to political principles adopted by our civil government, our disobedience to any laws which were impious and immoral, we should not hesitate to obey the Church and God. We should either keep silence and avoid all discussion of the subject, or else speak out frankly in condemnation of our laws and institutions if we believe them to be anti-Christian, or, which is the same thing, anti-Catholic in their principles," unquote. The reader need not be again reminded of the many important principles of our government, already pointed out, whereby our civil institutions have become, in the view of the papacy, anti-Christian and anti-Catholic. The avowal here is distinct and emphatic, that to none of these does the papist owe allegiance. If he acquiesces in them for the time being, it's only that strength enough may be acquired by prudential and cautious movements to aim effective blows at them when the open battle shall begin. Now, what's the inference here from R.W. Thompson? Just as I've asserted all along, just as R.W. Thompson has consistently asserted all along, just as J. Moss Ives in the book The Ark and the Dove, just as Avro Manhattan has asserted, and all the other authors that we've read here on Inquisition Update, that there is a battle soon to ensue in the United States, because the papacy insists that as the divine right ruler of the world, this form of government must fall, and it falls to the hands of the Roman Catholic hierarchy and the Roman Catholic laymen in this country to do everything they can within certain realms of caution to gradually overthrow the country and to be ready for an open battle to be declared by the papacy. That's the clear assertion of every credible author that we've read on this program. He continues, he says, Dr. Brownson, remember, we've talked about him earlier in many chapters. Dr. Brownson again brings his powerful pen to the support of this theory and expresses himself with his accustomed boldness and indifference to consequences. Binding us all to an acceptance of the law of God as the infallible Pope shall announce it, he says, quote, "Under this supreme law the state holds, and this law is the ground and limit of this authority, or of its rights and its obligations. This law is therefore the ground and limit of civil allegiance. The civil power holds all its authority from the supreme law, and consequently it has no authority to do or command anything that it forbids and that is contrary to it. Hence it follows that if the civil power commands anything contrary to the law of God, its commands do not bind the subject or citizen, and are not only not obligatory, but are to be treated as null and void from the beginning, simply because the civil power has no right to issue them, and the law of God forbids them. Here is the limit of civil obedience, or my allegiance to the civil powers, unquote. There is abundant evidence to show, besides what has been embodied in the preceding chapters, that these are the doctrines of religious faith set forth by the recognized authorities of the Roman Catholic Church, both in the United States and in Europe. A single additional reference, however, must now suffice, leaving the inquiring reader to search out others if he desires them for himself. A work considered exhaustive has recently appeared in a reply to Janus. Okay, that's a pseudonym. The main object of which is to support and justify the claim of the present Pope of power over the government of civil society. He quotes from a letter of Pope Pius IX to show that the Church, quote, requires of those clothed with political power that they should conform to those laws of morality and indeed such as she proclaims them, that is, the Roman Catholic Church proclaims them. Were she to abandon this postulate, she would then renounce her very mission, unquote. He justifies the doctrine set forth by the syllabus of 1864 in a whole chapter, and thus denounces that principle of our government which treats all churches with an equal degree of respect. Quote, to prescribe an equal respect for another religious community is to require that the doctrines of the true church, that is, the Roman Catholic Church, should be placed on the same level with the opinions of other religious bodies, unquote. He says, quote, the Pope can do nothing against the divine law, unquote. He insists upon the union of church and state. He admits that the powers of the Pope have heretofore been enlarged by forgeries, and yet asserts them to exist to the same extent as those forgeries were designed to stretch them. Okay, this is the consistent inconsistency of the Roman Catholic Church. They're most eloquent authors and writers and doctors of divinity and historians of the Church. The principal communication sources of the Roman Catholic Church admit that the papacy is built upon forgeries. And yet they do as this author himself does, continues to pretend as though those forgeries are legitimate. And they are the very forgeries that establish the pretended posture of the potentate in Rome to his divine right global status. It's inconceivable how the Roman Catholic Church can continue in the full knowledge that these are forgeries to insist that the world obey the Pope. And support Inquisition Update with your prayer. That's all I ask. The prayers of a righteous man availeth much. The truth finds few friends in the Roman Catholic state of America, and I'm sticking my finger in the eye of the most powerful institution, not only in this country, but in the world. And it's a truth that you will rarely hear anywhere else. It's given on a daily basis here on Inquisition Update. I'm persecuted, openly and secretly. The persecution will never end, The attempts to silence Inquisition Update, whether here on First Amendment radio or on amateur radio or on any other avenue of communication, is going to continue until I die. Okay, I'm not trying to be melodramatic. It's a simple fact. The Roman Catholic Church will not be resisted peacefully. They intend to silence all dissension by whatever means. And speaking out against the Roman Catholic Church is one of the most dangerous things one can do in civil society, as history bears the truth. So please pray for Inquisition Update. Pray that God will keep us on the air for as long as we can, and that when this voice is finally silenced, God will raise up another worthy man to pick up the battle. In Jesus' name, I pray His blessing both upon Inquisition Update. Now, we were talking about this anonymous author, this obviously Roman Catholic author who calls himself Janus. Enumerates the tenets of the Roman Catholic Church in such a way as to alarm any Protestant. He says he insists upon the union of church and state. Ladies and gentlemen, that is precisely what is happening in this country today. This is why we have such oppressive laws being passed, and our rights being taken away. The church is commanding the state to bring the people to blind acquiescence. And that's what we're doing. Few people are protesting the Roman Catholic Church as being the instigation of all the changes that are going on in this country, when history leaves no room for doubt where this is coming from. Certainly, an objective point of view will never reveal the possibility that our country is passing these laws for the benefit of its people. So who are they benefiting? The papacy. History is repeating itself. It's inexcusable that America should deny that the Vatican has a direct hand in the changes that are taking place in this country. He continues, he says, he admits that the powers of the Pope have heretofore been enlarged by forgeries, and yet he asserts them to exist to the same extent as those forgeries were designed to stretch them. The power of the Pope exists to the same extent as those forgeries were designed to stretch those powers. But these are comparatively immaterial by the side of his justification of the bull Unum Sanctum of Pope Boniface VIII, the doctrines of which have been already shown to be the necessary consequence of papal supremacy. It says the distinctive, just let me summarize Unum Sanctum in one phrase, that it is essential for every man, woman, and child on the planet to be subject to the Roman Catholic Pontiff. That's it. That was the real message of Unum Sanctum, and it was stated in that way. It is absolutely necessary that every man be subject to the Roman Catholic Pontiff. Not just every Roman Catholic. Every man be subject to the Roman Catholic Pontiff. That was Pope Boniface VIII in his bull Unum Sanctum. Now, I don't wish to be subject to the Roman Catholic Pontiff. I am subject of Christ and of a legitimate civil power, one who upholds the laws of God as God wrote them and interpreted them in the Scripture. but Pope Boniface VIII, who called himself the replacement of the Son of God on earth, who has a law that is diametrically opposed to divine law, asserted from his pontifical chair the thunders of the Pope that every man should be brought into submission to the Pope. So what is the natural conclusion? That force is going to have to be applied. Because I'm not going willingly to the feet of the Pope. And I use just that one individual case to set forth the national case for this country. That's where it stands. That's where R.W. Thompson says it stands. That's where Avro Manhattan says it stands. That's where history and the Bible says it stands. It says the distinctive principles proclaimed by this bull, and now a part of the canon law of the Roman Church, he sets down as follows. First, quote, it is necessary to salvation that every man should submit to the Roman pontiff, unquote. Second, quote, this is a necessary consequence of the dogma of the papal supremacy, unquote. Third, quote, it condemns the assertion by the state of any power over church property, unquote. Fourth, quote, the temporal power of Christian princes does not exempt them from obedience to the head of the church, unquote, which is the Pope. That means Barack Obama. You must submit to the Pope. Nancy Pelosi and everybody else in Congress, you must submit to the Pope. You Supreme Court justices, you must submit to the Pope. That's what it means. Fifth, quote, the material sword is drawn for the church, the spiritual by the church, unquote. Now I'm going to explain this one. The material sword is the civil power. Okay, the armies of the world, under every government, which is supposed to be run by the Pope, directly or indirectly through the government, these governments must carry the material sword for the Roman Catholic Church. According to the papal plan, that is the purpose of every military. That it should carry its sword for the Roman Catholic Church. And ladies and gentlemen, that's precisely what I accuse the United States militaries of doing. Now, I come under extreme condemnation from military people in this country. I call them crusaders because that's what they are. When they go to war under the pretense, the very false pretense, of preserving, protecting, and defending the Constitution of the United States and securing liberty for people overseas, that's not at all what the effect of their military operations are. It is to extend the jurisdiction and the authority of the papacy and Roman Catholic canon law. And a careful examination of the history of the wars will soon reveal, as is so starkly revealed in the book Vietnam, Why Did We Go by Avro Manhattan, that no question about it can be drawn. No question other than that can be drawn. Just like Behind the Dictators by L.H. Lehman, that described the papacy's goals and aims achieved through the Second World War and the First World War. That is a must-read. Behind the Dictators by L.H. Lehman. It is a matter of Roman Catholic canon law that the material sword of the nations must be drawn for the church, the Roman Catholic Church. And the spiritual sword is carried by the church. Okay? This is explained simply in this, that the Vatican is only 108 acres. It does not have its own army. It has to be protected by the civil armies of the rest of the world. And its conquest of the world must be conducted by the civil militaries of every government, simply because the church does not have the capability. It does not carry a material sword. If the Swiss Guard were to draw their ancient armaments into every country, they'd be routed. Okay? They can barely protect the Pope from assassination attempts. So the papacy absolutely must be protected by the armies of the world. That's what their purpose is, ultimately. And it is no calumniation to tell a veteran of this country he has been used as a crusader. That's what the whole purpose of the military is, according to the Roman Catholic Church, according to the papacy. And all one has to do is even just take a cursory look at history to realize that this is exactly what has happened. The papacy could not exist if it had to rely upon its own defenses. It couldn't exist. It's through the civil governments, through their militaries, that the conquest of the world has been achieved. And no greater civil power on the earth has achieved more for the papacy than the U.S. military. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, they're all crusaders. They draw their sword under the pretense of securing liberty for this country and for others around the world, when in fact they're making slaves of us all. He says the material sword is drawn for the church, the spiritual by the church, unquote. Sixth, quote, the material sword must cooperate with the spiritual and assist it, unquote. That's just simply restating what I've been articulating. That there must be a union of church and state. The Roman Catholic Church must rule over the state, that the state must use its military and cooperate with the church to assist the church in its global goals. Seventh, quote, the secular power should be guided by the spiritual as the higher, unquote. That is right. No authority in this nation is higher than the papacy when it comes to controlling our government. The people under the papal system have absolutely no say in the government. All voting booths are closed. There'll be no campaigning. The television won't be wall-to-wall politics. The Pope just simply assigns our rulers, and they rule at his behest. That's the divine right of kings. That's the foundation upon which the papacy has always been built. And the papacy makes no exception for the United States of America, even though there's no other nation that conquers the world better for the Pope than the United States. When the Pope is done with this country, the heresy is going to be routed out of it. And I assert to my listeners that day has arrived. History is about to repeat itself. That's why this program is called Inquisition Update. The Inquisition is coming to this country. It cannot be denied. There's no evidence to suggest that it won't happen. There's every reason to believe that the killing that is about to take place in this country is going to happen, and that the papacy is behind it, and that the papacy will use our military to do it, or a foreign military to do it, or to assist in that effort to divide the people so bitterly over politics and economics and race and religion and every other form that they simply draw their guns and kill anybody in their sight. The citizenry of this country just simply annihilate one another, and the papacy can dust the dust off his frock and say, well, it must have been a godless society. That's what's going to happen in this country. Many of my listeners may ask, where does Tom stand on the gun issue? There's no right answer. The Vatican has situated itself such that it cannot lose in this struggle over guns. If the American people turn in their guns, they go down without a fight. If they keep their guns and buy all the guns and ammunition that they can buy, they'll simply kill one another, and the papacy wins. That's where Inquisition Update stands on the gun issue. The American people do not know who the enemy is. They will not accept the papacy as the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist, that it was he that has soaked the earth with blood of the martyrs of the saints of all the godly peoples in history. They will not suspect the Pope as having anything to do but to just parade around in his Pope-mobile and shake his holy water on everything. He's a no-count. Nobody pays any attention to the Pope. Let me tell you something. Nobody pays any attention to the Pope except the people who are who are serious about finding out who really rules the world. And they know, just as well as I do, the Pope rules this world. And he's the most killingest institution that ever raised its head on the earth. The fulfillment of every Bible prophecy concerning Antichrist. They call me a rabid anti-Roman Catholic bigot. And that just seems to satisfy everybody. Dismiss him as a radical. Dismiss him as a bigot. He's just a tinkling cymbal and a sounding brass. Just ignore him. Well, I'm telling you, you won't be able to ignore the bayonets. You won't be able to ignore the space weapons, the technologically advanced weaponry of the United States of America if it's ever turned upon its citizens. Your little 6 guns, your little pop guns and shotguns and hunting rifles and your AK-47s and your AR-15s won't stand a chance. And especially if they put you in an economic system whereby it's all digital, and if you are found to be a dissenter to this new government, this new papal government that's unfolding in the world, they simply shut off your account. And you got to hunt rabbits to live. And they're going to take away your guns and your bullets. You're going to have to run that rabbit down if you're going to eat anything. That's where we're heading. That is where we're heading. History is going to repeat itself. We're going to be just as much persecuted in this country as the papacy persecuted the Hussites and the Albigensians and the Waldensians and the Protestants and the Jews. This would never have come about had it not been for Vatican Council II and the unquestioned acquiescence of the so-called Protestant churches in this country. If Protestantism at the end of Vatican Council II stood up and said, "We see the Pope in all of this. We see the opportunity for the popes to gobble up all of Protestantism and then to turn its civil swords against Protestants. And we're not going back to the Roman Catholic Church. Vatican Council II was nothing but a declaration of war against Protestantism. If Protestants would have been wise enough to see the real motive behind Vatican Council II, we might have staved off the current encroachments upon our rights. But it was the churches, the Protestant churches, the so-called ecumenical, evangeli-belly churches who sold us down the river. I've said it before on this program, I'll say it again. As goes God's people, so goes the nation. And the Protestants after Vatican Council II went to Rome. And that's where we're all going, because they sold us down the river. They sold us to the papacy for a bowl of pottage. They gave up our birthright. The greatest criminals against Christ today are so-called Protestant ministers. I repent of all of you. What a horror is about to unfold in the United States of America, and America simply will not recognize who's about to bring this horror upon us. And there's absolutely no excuse not to know and not to denounce it from every street corner. But we just don't want to be called an anti-Roman Catholic bigot. We don't want to be called nasty names. Fiddlesticks. Eighth quote, the spiritual has the preeminence over the material, unquote. Ninth quote, the temporal power is subordinated to the ecclesiastical as to the higher, unquote. In other words, the civil power is subordinate to the Pope. 10th quote, the temporal power, if it is not good, is judged by the spiritual. That's right. If Pope Pius IX didn't like our republic, he could damn it to hell. And that's what he did in his encyclical of 1864. It's still the law of the church. The Roman Catholic Church cannot renounce Pope Pius IX's encyclical and syllabus of error of 1864. It's the law of this land. 11th, quote, to the ecclesiastical authority, that is, to the Pope and his hierarchy, the words of the prophet Jeremiah apply. Quote, lo, I have set thee this day over the nations and over kingdoms, to root up and to pull down and to waste and to destroy and to build and to plant, unquote. How arrogant. This, ladies and gentlemen, explains all the wars of the world. Listen to it again. They arrogate to themselves the words of the prophet Jeremiah, quote, lo, I have set thee, the Pope, this day over the nations and over the kingdoms, to root up and to pull down and to waste and to destroy and to build and to plant, unquote. And who has laid all the cities of the world waste? The Roman Catholic Pontiff. Through the militaries of the world, and most especially the United States military. Shock and awe. Prophecy fulfilled. And what's going to bode for the people of this country? I'll see you tomorrow.